Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Kira Epstein, the co-director at the New School at Commonweal. Today, we are so pleased to welcome Manisha Gupta to the New School in the second of our three-part series introducing Commonweal's Omega Resilience Awards program partners. I'm going to turn this over in just a couple minutes to my co-director and our host, Michael Lerner. He'll introduce himself and Manisha in a minute. But for those of you who haven't been with us before, the New School is a learning community of dialogue and conversation. We explore ways to build resilience and better stewardship for our bodies, our souls, our communities, and the earth. We produce our conversations and we make them available for thousands of listeners worldwide on YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We've been doing this since 2007, and I think we have more than 400 podcasts available on our media sites now, including many other resilience-focused conversations. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Lerner, Commonweal President and our host for today's conversation. Also, welcome, Manisha.
Thank you, Kira. And Manisha Gupta, welcome to the New School at Commonweal. Honored and delighted to have you.
It's an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Manisha, you are the founder and CEO of Startup, which is an incubator and accelerator and platform for leadership for social entrepreneurs. And you've had a remarkable story. I just want to speak briefly to it. You were a journalist before you joined the social entrepreneurship sector. And for 30 years, you've studied, chronicled, and contributed to shaping the ecosystem for social entrepreneurship. You served as India country representative and international director at Ashoka Innovators for the Public, where you worked for 10 years. Before that, you worked with leading Indian and international nonprofit organizations and philanthropies. And you were also the regional representative for the Ford Global Fellowships Program. So you've had a rich array of experiences. We have many colleagues in common. And also, you are the leader of our, for Omega Resilience Awards, you are our India partner in exploring narratives for the polycrisis emerging from younger leaders in the global South. I won't feel complete if I don't understand who you are, and I'd love to know where you began from. How did Manisha Gupta become Manisha Gupta? Where were you born? What kind of family? How did you emerge?
Wow. Well, so I was born and brought up in the city of Kolkata in the 1970s, in the eastern part of India. Mm-hmm. It's a city, at that time, it was sort of really a city where art, culture, literature, sort of drove our existence and our language, our identities, much more than economics, right? And that sort of shaped me as a young person, and pretty much into who I am today. But I also found myself in a polycrisis of my own, because while we were growing up in this very, very progressive city of Satyajit Ray, of filmmakers who were sort of really creating films of global genres, there was radical literature emerging, there was radical art emerging in the city. I come from a North Indian family of Varanasi, and I was the fourth generation to be born and brought up in Kolkata. But I grew up in a large joint family of 20 to 30 people living together in a very big house of entrepreneurs. Now, back then, entrepreneurship was not a language that India was familiar with. So we were called traders, business people. So I grew up in a business class family in a largely communist city where business was not such a good thing.
Mhm.
But the family I grew up in was also very, very patriarchal. And there wasn't any voice for the women of the family. In fact, it was, we women in the family were educated up to a certain point, but it was established that they would get married very soon and be sent off. And here I was as a young person, sort of caught in not caught, just thriving in the feminist politics of Kolkata, but then going home to you know um, almost hide myself in a wheel of a pretend silence. But I had a lot of questions within me. And then when I was very young, at the age of 11, my very young father, at the age of who died in a terrible car crash at the age of 32. And that was the time when I really experienced gender violence firsthand. So my mother and my brothers, we immediately became second class citizens in our own nation of the family, of the joint family that we were. And I was 12 at that time, and there was a little voice in me that said that for you to become what you have to, you'll have to really pave a path for yourself, which is going to be very, very hard. So I knew that I would have to start working very hard, even though our family was very upper middle class, and it was sort of a fairly wealthy family. But the challenge of also for young girls growing in wealthy families is that you wealth actually constricts your voice, in the Indian context, because women then become the status keepers of the family, and they have to be protected, they have to be held. To cut a very long story short, I experienced, I rebelled against the family. I said I wasn't going to get married. I chose a life of working. So I think I may be the first woman in my entire family tree, extended family tree, to actually start to work and earn for myself. And there were many consequences. So there was violence, I was locked up, there were all kinds of sanctions. And then at one point of time, many things came together, and I was asked to leave my family. So at the age of 21, I left my family because the choice for me was to sort of stay as the good Indian young woman, in a joint family and take the whole tradition of patriarchy forward, or to just live the life of my imagination, of my dream, of my quest. And I chose the latter. So I left my family, or let's say I was thrown out of my family at the age of 21. And the month that I left the family, I actually joined Ashoka. So the world of social
Really,
entrepreneurship,
really
yeah, opened up.
extraordinary.
Maybe a week. So I joined Ashoka, and a week later, I was thrown out of the family. So I think in many ways, Michael, for me, I really do believe that I'm an agnostic, and I believe that if you're connected to the higher powers of the universe, because you recognize that the power, the force of the universe to change, to sort of really experience your voice, to find meaning of your own life, when it aligns, then many doors and windows open up. And I think that deep faith of a 21-year-old, now when I look back, pretty much was the faith that brought me into the world of social entrepreneurship. And I think my early days staying engaged with lots of feminist friends, of building bridges, of going out and sort of working with a lot of civil society networks. As a 19-year-old, as a 20-year-old, I started working as a journalist because I wanted to earn my own livelihood and earn my income. Because so that power, that hope, that courage, that a young woman gets, also from the forces of literature, the transformative forces of art and culture that were shaping the city in which she was growing up, vis-a-vis the hard constricting violence and reigns of a patriarchal family, that tussle, and sort of what that poly crisis, and then what really happens when you overcome that, sort of, I think that probably shapes who I am today. And then
Well,
I also now, the dots also connect, and I see that after so many years, I took the best of the entrepreneurial traditions that I grew up with, because, entrepreneurship is also pretty much in my DNA. I'm the fourth generation entrepreneur, and I set up startups. So I don't know if that makes sense, because I think
it
I
makes
haven't really
perfect sense.
spoken about this to anybody so much.
Well, I'm so grateful. It makes perfect sense. But let me just follow that. You said you're an agnostic, but you said that if you can tap into the higher powers of the universe, so your agnosticism doesn't seem to preclude some connection with the higher powers of the universe. Is that true?
My understanding of being an agnostic is that I don't believe in organized religion, but I believe in the higher power of the universe. And I have also, in many ways, been a deep believer in the teachings and the practices of the Buddha. And, I have been part of groups that have studied and practiced Buddhism in daily life. And I think sort of that was really what gave me strength to shape startup. The early years of startup were really hard, because there really isn't an investment model or a funding model for the kind of work that we do. I was told by many people that I didn't really have a head for numbers or for finances, and hey, who's going to pay you for who's going to pay you to get incubated, or for any strategy services, whereas where there are so many universities that set up these incubators for free. But there were many challenges in my life, in my journey, where as a woman setting up a model like startup. But in those through those challenges, I think I was able to sort of show up every day at work because of the connection because of my daily Buddhist practice, and because of my connection with the powers of the universe. All kinds of gates start to open up. And in fact, the artist's way says that, you can find the artist's life by actually connecting with, the creative powers in your life. Because if you're part of the universe is also part of you. So the creativity of the universe also lies within you. And I think, when we talk about intersectional work, when we talk about interconnected work, is there a way in which we can even do this work without seeing how our own lives are interconnected with the universe that we are part of? So I think that just keeps me driving. And that ensures that every day is a safe space. Not every day, or most days are a safe space.
It's a beautiful story. And I think you can see, I talk about the power of story. Your personal story gives me such a strong sense of the power of startup. And so I want to ask you this question. In the most difficult times, what is the place within you that you go to get yourself through the most difficult times? What is the quality or the place or the force within you that enables you to go through the most difficult times?
Actually, Michael, in the most difficult times, I go to a place that's outside of me. That's my community, but my community helps me connect with or reminds me of the impossible beautiful things that one can achieve, and also that we need to strive for small wins every day. Now that community would be, say, the community that I get to create at work. So it could be the community of rural women entrepreneurs. So for example, one of my dearest friends who also shares my name, Manisha Gupta, is a woman from the nomadic denotified tribes of Maharashtra. She comes from a family of sugarcane cutters. She grew up eating one meal every alternate day. At the age of 15, when she was pregnant, her husband and her in-laws beat her up all night and threw her in a well. So she spent an entire night in the dark, swirling waters of the well. But the next day, when, somehow she was rescued by the villagers, she emerged. And that 15-year-old girl who was pregnant with 9 month pregnant with her second child, decided that she would create a movement, the largest ever movement for women of sugarcane cutters who would transform themselves and transform their villages. And today she's done that. I mean, she's gone on to really become a remarkable change leader. She's an Ashoka fellow. She is part of every network. And I often go to her and I ask her, I said, in your harshest moments, what kept you going? And she said, that night in the well was the day when I realized that, I'm here for a purpose. And as I replenish and I give energy to the larger purpose, my life will get replenished. So in the hardest moments, I think and there are so many friends and who are part of the community that I think I have been very fortunate and honored, to create through startups. So in the hardest times, I go to my community because, I think I'm much more externally focused, or and when I'm seeking hope and audacity. So that's where I go.
Such a beautiful story. And, I have led retreats for cancer patients for the last 28 years, over 220 week-long retreats for cancer patients. So I've been with many people whose lives shifted in a very profound way in the equivalent of that night in the well, when we are taken to that place, or that place in your own life where you realize that you had to choose between, your family or really living authentically. And when we find that place in ourselves that is, beyond everybody else's expectations about us and what we really need to do. So you found that in yourself, and you have this deep friendship with this extraordinary woman. I wanted to ask, did anybody in your family over time come to appreciate the choice that you made, or did they remain opposed to you?
This is such an interesting question. So, Michael, I started writing. So I do a lot of writing, and I think I would also say that in the hardest times, in the difficult times as a entrepreneur, I do take to writing as a way to sort of make meaning and to get hope. So 30 years after the incident, of violence, and when I was asked to leave, when I was thrown out of the house, I wrote about it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the family reconciled, 10 years after I left the house. But nobody, but, in my family, in the extended family, nobody ever spoke about that incidence of violence. It was almost like another kind of silence where the perpetrators and the victim survivors said, let's just move on, let bygones be bygones. But that way wounds don't heal and closures don't happen. So so we spent several years being very happy. There was reconciliation. I but I could never really engage with the family in the same way as as I saw everybody else, my brother or my mother engaging. Because I had created my own beautiful family with my partner, my daughter, and my extraordinary, mother-in-law and sister-in-law. My mother-in-law is an astrophysicist and who has her own story. So 30 years later, so I think 2 years back, I wrote about, that 22-year-old Manisha, and my equivalent of being in the dark well. And it was just a story that I was writing for a small cohort, as you meet cohorts in a writing workshop. And people found a lot of resonance with that story. And then that story got published in an international magazine. And that sort of really led to a second, spate of silence in the family. And, by that time, this happened last year. And I just wondered, I said, there was silence then and there's silence now. So in the whole meshwork of natal family violence, silence in itself is so violent, right?
Yes.
So I had this conversation with my brothers and my mother, and I also realized at that point in time that there is a lot of shame, in sort of acknowledging what's happened, and and people have moved on, and family matters are really complex. But I am writing and I am beginning to speak a lot with my younger cousins, with my brothers, with this generation, to sort of really make sure that there is a recognition that what happened was not right. But on the flip side, I must say that after after the family experience, the power of a young girl who has made up her mind, and you can't stop them. All the women in our extended families, they all had got the full freedom to choose their lives. My uncles and other members of the family, sort of really transformed to become liberal parents. The girls in my family after me sort of went on to set up businesses. They went on to study. They chose their own life partners, which may seem very ordinary in most families, but it was quite an extraordinary seismic shift. So I think I would say that while they don't talk about, their contribution in, sort of violence on me, they transformed significantly and, opened pathways and bridges and became allies for other girls in my family after I left.
Manisha, I'm so grateful for this part of our conversation. And because isn't a beautiful example of the power of our stories, right? In other words, you were kind enough to share this story of your life. And for me, it provides the deepest kind of insight into who you are. So I'd like to start with a pretty simple question, which is the polycrisis is exposing itself in the global south, including India, in ways that are very dramatic. And I'm curious how you tell the story of how you have come to understand what's going on in the world in India specifically, from the point of view of polycrisis or metacrisis or permacrisis, whatever language we want to use, from that perspective. How do you hold it from your experience in India?
So, thank you, Michael. To be honest, when we first heard the term polycrisis was when Commonweal, our wonderful partners, Mark and Andrea, had the first conversation with us and, spoke about polycrisis. So it was the first time I had heard the term polycrisis, but it wasn't as if the phenomenon was unfamiliar to us. We had been watching polycrisis unfold in so many incomprehensible, dramatic ways, as you said. So just the term polycrisis, when we heard that term from Commonweal, from your team, we suddenly got a vocabulary and a way to make meaning of, what was unfolding before us. And very quickly, we went into our own research in India on, the manifestations of polycrisis. And we really started to make meaning of why the loss of farms and forests for, the agrarian population of India was also leading to the loss of mental health and well-being. We started to understand the many, many multiple intersectionalities and interconnections between the strands that hold and generate life. And as those strands were coming undone, we were seeing polycrisis in its many ways unfold. So just to give you an example, before we started working with Aura, we were seeing with all our partners who were working with remote, historically underprivileged communities, we were starting to see that slowly the issues of children, the issues of child safety and child protection were becoming issues of climate change. And for a development sector, that continues to work in most parts in silos, where your child protection and education and livelihoods and climate are sort of really seen as different domains with very few connections. The very obvious fact that access to safe water could ensure, vibrant young people in a village, that connection people were sort of struggling to make, but it was there for us to see. Slowly, we started to see, actually not slowly, very quickly, we started to see that, polycrisis is intersectional, it is interconnected, it is hyperlocal, and the masters of polycrisis, the masters of sort of addressing or building resilience to polycrisis are really the communities who are on the ground, who are living with it, who are making meaning of it, who are making sense of it. And so for us to really start to see our own work, through the Aura work, really meant that we had to distance ourselves a little bit from the prevalent, development sector paradigms, right? And we started to actually move away from the prevalent discourse to tune in to voices on the margins even more, to tune in to stories and narratives that were underfunded or that were not even coming up, surfacing up. And that was, I think, the most exceptional gift and journey that we got into, through the work with Aura and the Aura Fellowship in India, because we started to do a few things. We started to look at who are the players who are on the ground, but who are sort of really working in very intersectional ways. So, for example, who are the folks who are really working with communities to start to merge data, design, narrative building, and storytelling? We also started to look at, art and culture as levers for norm shift and for generating new dialogues. We started to look for well-being practices that are rooted in the communities, that are driven by the communities. And really, Michael, while this kind of a conversation is pretty much the norm in the Aura community, in the Commonweal community, in the larger development sector, we know how important it is, but we usually don't have too many mechanisms or spaces or platforms to honor it, to throw light on these conversations. The Aura Fellowship enabled us to do that. So we started to look at younger people. We started to look at journalists. We started to look at folks who are working with long form journalism, folks who were really working with communities to see how media making, storytelling could be the next frontier. And I just want to stop for now by saying that there were a few principles that we also brought into our work in the context of really responding to polycrisis. So one, we really understood that hyperlocal is the new global, because the ways in which multiple stressors combust to create a new set of crises in one area in India can the manifestation of of multiple challenges coming together in one area is very different from how the same crisis manifests 200 kilometers away. So if you're looking at how in Delhi, the political crisis with the climate change crisis, with the crisis of civic facilities, how that shows up, and how that kind of, and how that can be the theater almost of generating urban youth rising to say, how can we be meaningfully engaged in the design and development of our cities so that our cities in the context of polycrisis can be responsive to our need. How that manifests is very different from, the villages of Uttar Pradesh that are 100 kilometers away from the capital of Delhi, where young women are actually not getting access to education beyond the very general or the very basic levels. So the hyperlocal and site-specific work became really important for us, which is counter to the larger dialogues of scale and outcomes and outputs. We also started to see that meaning making and sense making is going to be the new way for us to start to listen to what's happening on the ground. And so storytellers from the community who emerge with their narratives, those are the ones who are going to shape the frontiers of development. So we really started to learn to keep our ears very close to the ground. And third, we really realized that any kind of that we really need to look at younger practitioners who are doing deeply intersectional ways work, not by accident, but by design. So those were just some of the things that we've started to see. But I would agree with you to say that even as we speak, the polycrisis is unfolding itself. We are in the midst of national elections, and we are seeing polycrisis unfold itself in so many global, local and global ways that it can be quite overwhelming.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So you've now had your first cohort of Aura Fellows, Omega Resilience Awards Fellows, and it's been an extraordinary group of people. Could you give us one or two examples of a couple of your fellows that to you represent, just the beginning of the spectrum of younger leaders that you're working with?
Well, Michael, as we speak, we've got two cohorts in place. So we have 14 extraordinary fellows.
Right.
But you're right. We've completed a year with our first cohort.
Right.
And all 7 are exceptional in the work that they're doing and in the boundaries that they are carving for themselves as well as for the sector. I can really speak about Kumar Sambhav, who's a young data journalist, and he and his team of equally young journalists have come together to create a Land Conflict Watch, which is India's largest data dashboard, and it's a live dashboard of land conflicts across the country. And, in that way, what Land Conflict Watch really does is that it creates a platform with live sort of map, dots and maps of conflicts across the country. And the idea is not to really frighten the community by focusing on conflict, but to sort of really say that that land conflict in India, which is happening at such an accelerated space, is actually a deeply systemic issue. And what sits at the heart of land conflict is the lack of data. So it's become a place where communities as well as government stakeholders, other stakeholders converge. So it's become a bridge, and instead of sort of really going into issues of naming, blaming, shaming, what this model does is it says that here is data. These are the ways in which the conflict over land for, let's say, thousands of farmers have occurred. Is because perhaps processes weren't followed. So do we know what is it that can be done? And it asks multiple solutions driven questions. At the same time, it becomes a place for awareness and knowledge building for communities on the ground. So millions of farmers now know that one day if the land was, they woke up and they realized that their land was no longer theirs, they have a way to investigate and they have a way to raise their voice through data. The data is now not just big numbers or statistics, but the data is now being turned into narratives. And what Kumar has really done through land conflict is starting to build a whole array of stories of how land conflict really looks, means, and feels for different stakeholders in this space. And in this way, what the model is doing is bringing many people to engage with the issue of conflict from a positive solutions generating lens, rather than an acrimonious, sort of a lens where we say the system is breaking and everything is dysfunctional. Then we also have Samir Bordoloy, who is working in the northeast of the country. And what he's really doing is he's creating a movement of young people and getting them to sort of really start to become masters of food forests. So he's building food forests across, the forests of the rainforests of the northeast of India. And it's also an area it's a region which has been in political and civic conflict and very bloody conflict for several decades, and multiple generations of young people have lost their lives or have just disappeared or have been pulled into extremist movements. But what he's starting to do is to sort of divert the attention of these young people to say, if you really want to fight for something, and if you want to fight for identity and your state, your core identity is your commons. Your core identity is your food systems, your farms, your forests, your lakes. So why don't we come together and create a whole network of, change making? And in that way, he's actually created close to 2,000 young green commandos, who are going about regenerating their lands, their lives, and therefore, their identities. And he's building a whole movement, linking it also to small businesses, and rural businesses. And then, of course, we have our Aura fellow in Sarika Panda, who's started Rahagiri Foundation. So her focus is urban, and she's looking at how the streets of India's cities can be spaces of building fraternity, of radical hope, of generating radical inclusion. So she has started to work with citizen groups in urban centers, with government departments, with road engineers, with a wide variety of stakeholders that build the ecosystem of India's cities. And they come together to really celebrate their cities, entire cities for a week. Every week actually gets cleared of traffic, and there are citizens who come together to dance, to experience joy, to listen to music, but to also start to build a certain discourse that who we are is so sort of determined by the cities we live in. And so the right to the city, as we know, is our right to change ourselves by changing our cities. So across rural urban continuum, we have Aura fellows who are creating new models. These models are collaborative. These models are being developed from a very deep understanding of systems, and they're bringing the whole understanding that when you want to change or revitalize an entire system, you can't do it alone. You have to engage and unleash the change making possibilities of everybody who is suffering or who is affected by the problem in the system. But most of all, Michael, all the Aura fellows that we are, so honored to work with are folks who address very hard and complex problems with great joy and optimism. And also through color, through music, through festivals, through drama, through narrative building. And I think what we are learning from these fellows is that to sort of really address polycrisis and build resilience, what we require is culture change. And that's where narrative shift happens. And that's where, everybody needs to be part of a new culture.
Yeah, there's a wonderful saying that one of our close colleagues cites often. It's very well known, but the saying is, "Culture eats strategy for lunch." I don't know if you've
Yes.
but
yes, of course.
I bring it up because so often in work for social change, we're really focused entirely on strategy, and we don't always focus on culture. And so the part of the arts in culture shift and the part of the arts, I mean, people think that people make decisions based on just rational criteria of some kind, or that you can reach people just by intellectual arguments. But the fact of the matter is that the core of our beings are quite emotional, our emotional responses. And culture reaches emotions. Culture touches us at the emotional level, which is why culture eats strategy for lunch. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just the role of the arts piece in both of your cohorts. How are you exploring that?
Right. What we learned from the first cohort is how important the role of art is in really building resilience in very remote and sort of affected communities. And so we took that learning and really looked high and low for folks who were looking at arts as culture, as levers for norm shift for the second cohort. So interestingly, in the second cohort, almost all our 7 fellows are using arts in either community arts practice, social arts, or literature and performative arts, or setting up models that are at the intersection of art, citizen action, and ecology. So almost all our 7 fellows in the second cohort are using art and culture as a tool for a narrative shift. And we hope that moving forward, even for the third cohort, that's really going to be our lens. Interestingly, what we've seen is that we have found a lot of resonance across the development sector for our approach, for the thrust on arts, for our focus on arts and culture across India. And we've had, foundations, we've had networks, we've had platforms, just really telling us that this is really the need of the hour. So we are beginning to see a broader recognition of deep work that art and culture can do to build community hope and resilience in the times of polycrisis, and that art and culture are not soft feel good things, because they are really the new power. What we have really seen, what does art do to sort of that's deep and powerful, and that's catalytic. So as you said, it really connects people in ways that are beyond beyond language. It connects people, across identities. So one of our Aura Fellows in India, Shweta Bhattat, runs the Gram Art Project, which is sort of really a project where she's working across multiple villages to bring together farmers, young people, rural women, and experience what it means to be art makers, to become makers. So they are actually turning their entire farms and how they cultivate, their forms of farming into art in itself. And for them, the moment you start to see farming as art, you realize, you kind of you start to create new memory, and you realize that that from the very beginning, farming was not something that people did. Farming was something that communities engaged with, right? And the moment you start to engage with your activities from the lens of art or culture, you start to see your work and yourself in very deep ways. Your village farm, your village pond actually becomes a mirror to who you are. And so, it just deepens and replenishes relationships that we have with our environments in very, very profound and inconspicuous ways. And that starts to then build new habits, and it creates new patterns. It creates new ways of looking at one's own self. And that's what we've seen through Shweta's work really in Gram Art. There are entire villages that come together. Farmers are beginning to identify themselves as art makers. They're setting up many forms of generative practices. They are building. They are performing. They are building performance art spaces. Based on how they experience farming in new ways. And that is the culture shift that we are seeing in these villages. Now, this work, when we start to work with art and culture and start to sort of uncover how powerful they can be in generating hope and ideas that are sustainable and that are in sync with, the nature and environment, there is more change work that happens, in the subterranean levels that are unseen, that cannot be documented very cleanly and neatly in, results-based frameworks, in output maps, in Gantt charts, or in very neat theories of change, right? So these processes are don't immediately show results. These processes, as you know, are hard to describe. But these processes, like nature, are really processes that will be sustainable, because these processes, anchor communities to resilience by dropping roots deeper in the soil. And what we have seen is that while we will move forward with arts and culture as our main pillars, as it were, for Aura India, we also need to have more conversations with the world of philanthropy. We need to have more conversations with the world that holds power, and money, to sort of really build those bridges and understanding of how arts needs more funding, how arts needs to be really seen as the new tool for healing the world, because art heals, and eventually what we need today are more generative practices of development and change rather than performative measurable practices. So those are the ways in which we are beginning to see the importance of centering arts and culture in all work of development, but also how it is mainly a starving sector because there is so little funding available for it in the Indian context. And I speak only for the Indian context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about engaging art as a core dimension of navigating the polycrisis and social change is that it touches us at the imaginal level, which, as you point out, is beyond words. But it also brings together, speaking of philanthropy, people who might be uncomfortable with social change processes that blame and shame, and rather creates this space of evoking human experience that does not blame and shame, So, right. So I think that's a critical dimension. So you mentioned engaging philanthropy, and that's something you've really given some thought to. And I wondered if you could talk about, in the India context, how you are exploring engaging philanthropy with this work.
Right. So, Michael, we are in the early stages of doing this, but we are very hopeful because just to give you an example, over the two rounds of search and selection for the Aura Fellows in India, we took the route of working with nominators, and what we decided to do was to curate a bespoke, group of nominators, say about 150 nominators in India who I and my colleague Paramita Saha, who's sort of really the driving force and energy behind Aura in India and whom you have met, we have had multiple conversations with our nominators, most of whom are philanthropists, or several of whom are philanthropists, and many more are thought leaders in the sector. And through the route of engaging them to think of who could be good nominees or applicants or potential Aura India Fellows, we've started to really talk to them about the Aura approach in India. We've started to talk to them about, the importance of really starting to fund arts and culture, because they are going to be the levers for sense making, for meaning making, for new imaginations, as you said. And we've actually experienced a tremendous positive response. So we are hoping to sort of really take those friendships and those conversations that we've been able to have, and over a period of time, but not over a period of time, but very quickly also start to engage them in investing in arts and culture. On another note, we have also partnered with an organization in India called Dasra, which did this whole report of navigating the full potential of philanthropy in India for a program like Aura with the focus on art and culture. And we hope that, by building bridges and partnerships with other platforms that are engaged with philanthropists, because, organizations like Dasra and other catalytic ecosystem builders have their own networks of philanthropy and philanthropic supporters, we will be able to really spread the net wide and start to have many more conversations. So we are at an early stage, but we are really at a good stage. We are also seeing in India, with the climate crisis unfolding in the way it is, right? Um, there are really interesting new future forward philanthropic organizations that have started to set up base. They are led by young Indians. They are interested in moving away from tried and tested methods of philanthropy, and those could be really good partners for programs, for young programs like Aura, but also for many other initiatives that are looking to work with art and culture. One very positive enabler for drawing philanthropists into this mix has been the emerging role of technology, and how technology and digital medium are sort of really becoming the space where young practitioners, where intersectional practice, where young philanthropists are beginning to get really engaged and excited of how storytelling can be amplified, how voices of remote rural India that we otherwise never had access to can come, can sort of actually go viral. Of course, there are flip sides to what digital media and social media can do, but those are some really positive enabling forces that will make our work with um, philanthropists exciting and hopeful as we move forward in the context of funding domains like the arts, which is severely underfunded right now.
I'd love to go back from the Aura conversation to talk a little bit just about startup itself. How did you, I mean, you did the work with Ashoka, you did the work with the Ford Foundation fellowships, you were a journalist, all those things. How did you decide to launch startup? What was the kind of analysis or motivating force that led you into this very extraordinary social change organization? When I look at the number of projects you've done, your clients, and so on and so forth, it's quite remarkable. And I just wondered why did you decide to make startup such a core part of your life work?
So this is such a beautiful question. I started to work with Ashoka when I was 21 years old. And I was just out of college. I was an active journalist, and my work with Ashoka sort of was, I stepped into it very, very accidentally. I was a journalist, and I was invited to a meeting where I was told some organization is starting a new magazine called Change Makers, and you might be interested. And I walked straight into the office of Ashoka. It was launching a paper magazine at that point of time called Change Makers, and I met Shushmita Ghosh, who was then the India representative and went on to become the global president, the president emeritus of Ashoka. So this was in the mid 1990s, and we hadn't heard the term social entrepreneurship in India. I mean, the term was very new. In fact, the term entrepreneurship was not in our vocabulary in India at that point of time. But Ashoka sort of really opened up a canvas of imaginations, ideas, meetings, building friendships and partnerships with extraordinary social entrepreneurs. And when you are 21 years old and you spend the next 10 years just immersed in sort of the stories, ideas, change making potential of leading social entrepreneurs, you start to learn from them, and then through osmosis you come to a point where you become a bit of an entrepreneur yourself, and you want to take that risk. You want to you really want to try paths that are that haven't been tried before, because that becomes the only way for you to be, So through my days of, fairly young, as a young career, as a young professional, I would be spending 12 hours every day, 6 days a week for so many years with social entrepreneurs. And I think that's what happens, that's the flip side of working with social entrepreneurs. In 2003, 2004, I had worked with more than 100 Ashoka fellows in India, and I had started to see that there was no platform or no space um, where leading social entrepreneurs of the future, could be identified, could be mentored, could be trained, because right, and there were these wonderful white spaces available and open in the sector. There weren't too many incubators at that point of time. We actually didn't even have words like incubation and acceleration. And I just said, well, why don't we try? Why don't I try to do something? Why don't I start to look at who could be, the change makers, the systems changers, the positive disruptors, 10 years from now, and start to work with them to actually shape their ideas. Because when you work with catalytic organizations, you don't really have a hand in shaping the ideas of change makers. You meet them at a point of time when they have really cooked their ideas in their heads, or they've done prototypes. And I was just getting greedy because I wanted to be, meet young people or meet social entrepreneurs at a time when, they're still forming, they're shaping their ideas. They're still sort of really at that time of extreme risk taking, and that's how I started up Startup. But, and also the name Startup, a lot of people ask me, what were you smoking when you called your organization Startup? Because in 2003, 2004, we didn't have a startup landscape. We didn't have the vocabulary of startup. So I just thought, well, if I call my if I were to do run an organization and call it startup, that would be really cool and inventive. But now we are often asked, so you're a startup, do you even have a name? And we have to tell everybody, well, the only thing startup about us is our name, because we are 13 years old.
Mhm.
What, yeah, so, but in many ways, I didn't realize then, and I understand now, that I set up Startup, and we are a small community of all all women professionals in startup. I realized now that I started up Startup as a portal almost for my own quest to meet with um, grassroots change makers, innovators, people who are challenging status quo, but through innovation solutions oriented model. It was my own quest to partner with and to understand what really goes into the minds of very ordinary people who actually are able to create and shape extraordinary movements of change. And, if we could be part, and the whole idea of Startup was, if we could be part of a small part of large movements, large systems change ideas, by actually shaping strategy. So you said, you spoke about, you made a comment on strategy, but, strategy is, there are many different ways of doing strategy, right? There are many different ways in which strategy can become a way for you to build the culture of change, right? Strategy is in very simple ways a way for you to get all the thousands of ideas that you have in your head, and to then channel it into a few roadmaps for yourself that then enable you and all your players to same page on the best ways of taking forward the ideas in through routes that you are the most excited to work on. So what we really do is we started to work with grassroots movements. We started to work with rural women entrepreneurs. We started to work with young change makers. We started to design fellowship programs for a lot of community-based change makers who may not be able to be who are off the grid, and who may not have the platform to sort of really attract the attention of what is mainstream development in India. And that really became a calling, but it also became a way for us to then build bridges with philanthropic organizations, it became a way for us to actually be part of the larger ecosystem of social entrepreneurship. So that in a nutshell is how and why I set up Startup.
That's very helpful. I mean, I encourage people to go to your startup website, because the number of projects that you've helped launch, and I love just the way you describe it as an incubator, an accelerator, a springboard for social entrepreneurial leadership. But I think the beauty of the social entrepreneur concept is that, and this is something Bill Drayton, who we both know, the founder of Ashoka, really understood, is that that oppositional social change has its limits, especially because the power of the global financial economic system is so overwhelming that if all you do is to rail against it, you come directly into conflicts that the limits of what you can do that way are pretty real. But if you look at it from a social entrepreneur point of view, the social entrepreneurs, as Bill Drayton often said, are people who have a vision and they won't rest until they bring it into existence. And they have that unique skill set to drive that change, to drive that idea into existence. And then, of course, Ashoka took on the everyone a change maker dimension, right, as well as the social entrepreneurs. But there's something, I was literally on a conversation just before this morning about changing chemical policy in the European Union, which is something we worked on for 20 years. And one of the very experienced grant makers there said that he had really learned that the theory that you just invest in what they call the bingos, the big NGOs, right, and they'll do it, is actually rarely as effective as investing in the networks of Absolutely. Smaller NGOs, which reach the passion of individual social entrepreneurs and individual activists at a much deeper level. And so I think, part of the insight of Ashoka, part of the insight of Startup, is this power of bringing together part of the power of the Omega Resilience Awards. And then what really interests me that we're hearing from all three of our partner organizations is how they are using the Omega Resilience Awards as a catalyst for developing their own organizations. So it goes beyond simply the impact on the fellows, and you've done, I think, an extraordinarily skilled job of bringing in all your advisors and nominators and engaging in an early way with India philanthropy. So perhaps you could speak to this sense of how Omega is serving your broader interest as a social entrepreneur and the founder of Startup in creating a whole ecosystem of deeper shift.
Absolutely. Michael, straight after the first cohort of Aura was identified, and we kind of organized a little meeting, our first meeting of Aura Fellows. Everybody, all Aura Fellows were really talking about, we always knew that we were working with multiple stressors, who interact and combust in unpredictable ways, but we didn't have a term for it. We didn't understand. But with the Aura Fellowship, the whole framework of polycrisis now suddenly is enabling us to make meaning. And this was true not just for fellows, but it was true for all of us in Startup, because, at that same time, we were working with multiple leading social entrepreneurs, who had invited us into their programs as their strategy partners. And, it became impossible for us to not see the problems that they were grappling with from a polycrisis lens. So the whole understanding of polycrisis and, the whole lens of polycrisis, the importance of sense making, the importance of art and culture, in building community resilience, the criticality of really focusing on hyperlocal actors, all these insights that we learned from Aura actually started to find their way in very, very beautiful and seamless paths into the strategies that we started to create. So you'd be interested to know that, one of our programs with a leading child rights and child protection organization in India is now all about looking at how child protection should become intersectional through art, culture, narrative shift, fellowship as a vehicle, around somewhat sort of along the model of the Aura India Fellowship, and and how these fellowships need to be seeded with other organizations that are in spaces of climate change, in spaces of livelihoods, in spaces of health. Because if children are everywhere, and if children are being most impacted by polycrisis, how can we create a fellowship model that uses an intersectional lens, uses and starts to see the problem from a polycrisis lens, which is a systems lens, and tries to bring art and culture, as levers of change. So the Aura model actually was very joyfully, sort of pretty much found its way in very joyful and excited ways, because it sort of opened up new avenues of creativity for our partner that has been working in the child protection domain. At the same time, we've created a very, very robust Aura India Advisory Council. So our advisory council has, Shushmit Ghosh who he and his partner sort of went on to create, to produce and direct this film called Writing with Fire, which became India's first documentary to find its way into the Oscars. It was shortlisted for the Oscars. It was nominated for the Oscars. So he's on our advisory. We have, Pooja Sood of Khoj, who has shaped the field of, contemporary arts across South Asia, who's on our advisory. Kalpana Vishwanath of Safety Pin, that is actually one of the first organizations using data technology to sort of really make cities gender and youth responsive. And we have a host of other such intersectional Aura India advisors. In fact, I should share with you that one of our dearest Aura India advisors passed away a few weeks ago. Her name was Poonam Bir Kasturi, and she founded Daily Dump. I think she's one of the global pioneers in home composting, the home composts that she designed actually have found their way into several design museums across the world. Now, when we got these intersectional practitioners who are working at very deep ways to build large and diverse networks of change makers, of young fellows, of emerging practitioners, who then start to speak to each other. For them, Aura was a next leap, was a collective next leap, because we are also at a point of time in our own political landscape, in our development landscape, where all of us are desperately in need. And we are desperately yearning for fierce audacity, for new ideas, for micro solidarities. And, even for them, Aura became an ecosystem to take that leap. So at two levels then. One, ways in which we are building, taking our learning from the Aura Fellowship into a lot of the strategy and leadership work that we are doing with multiple networks and organizations in the country. We are sort of really creating pathways for the learnings of Aura to move into our other work. But two, even for all our Aura India advisors, collectively, Aura is becoming the perhaps the beginning of a new way of even addressing change and of creating new models.
I'd like to shift away from this wonderful part of the conversation to some broader questions, and I can't help asking you one that is fascinates me. I'm sure you know of Kim Stanley Robinson's book, Ministry for the Future.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I'm curious, in the West, at least, Kim Stanley Robinson's book, Ministry for the Future, landed with extraordinary power. And he was asked to, speak at the IPCC thing and so on. I've heard mixed. Well, I don't want to prejudge it, but I'm curious, authentically curious, how Ministry for the Future landed in India, precisely because the book opens with this, disastrous heat wave in India that kills millions of people, and I'm just curious, what has been the cultural impact of that book in India? And is it seen differently from the wide gratitude that a lot of people in the United States and Europe feel that, in a sense, he describes it as a utopian novel in that a livable future actually comes out of this crisis, and then the creation of this ministry and how it brings the world into some kind of balance. So I'm authentically curious how it landed with different communities in India.
Michael, I really wouldn't know because I have not heard too many conversations about the book.
Uh-huh.
I have read some excerpts of it, but my understanding is that a lot of the dystopian world of the future that we have seen being described is what we are living and experiencing with utter shock on a daily basis in India. And what we are hearing from everybody in civil society as well as in the academic world is that something very, very generative and something wise will come out of this. But we will have to move away from all the structures, systems, ways of listening, non-listening. We'll have to create new habits. And, this whole process will have, but we'll have to go through the entire churn. And this is something that's becoming more and more evident, our worlds, our cities, our heat waves, our food crisis, our political crisis, the environment of utter violence, hate, polarization. It's all a mirror of our own selves. And more people are now beginning to realize this than even 5 years back. So I think we have a lot of our own literature that's starting to talk to us, and where we are beginning to realize.
So from your point of view, it hasn't had a large cultural impact in India. I mean, if it would, you would have engaged with it more in all likelihood if it had had a larger cultural impact.
I have to say that I haven't heard too many conversations about it.
Yeah. So let me shift.
But I may be I may not be plugged into maybe some
No,
circles
yeah,
where
I
the
understand.
conversations are happening.
Let me again go to a macro question. I'm 80 years old. I began to engage with India in my 20s, so I've been there many times. Love the country, love the culture. When I first came to India, it was well before the tech boom, and it was well before the diaspora of Indian engineers and entrepreneurs took on such a major role, both within India and in the United States, in the tech world. And many of them became philanthropists, as you well know. What has been the impact in the social entrepreneur sphere of the Indian ascension in the dominant tech industry, both within India and in the United States and around the world? How has the tech entrepreneurship leadership of many people of Indian descent impacted social entrepreneurship within the country?
Wow, that's a wide sweeping question, but a very, very important one, Michael. So, I will try to respond to it with a few stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I and my team at Startup, we spend a lot more time, on the ground with communities, right? Because we really do believe that it is the local change makers that are embedded in the communities, that, proximate leaders who've emerged from communities that, they are working to transform. And when we work, so let me share a story of how they as leaders, are looking at technology. So, when we really start, so we work with lots of rural women entrepreneurs who are changing the way business is being done in rural India. And we were part of a project. We had designed a project where we spoke to 200 rural women entrepreneurs across 2 states of India that are deeply impacted by the climate crisis. These are women who have not had access to education. Most of them have been abandoned. They have faced extreme violence, but they are running thriving businesses, because they've sort of, entrepreneurship has been the platform of empowerment for them. And we asked them questions on technology. So we said, okay, what does technology mean to you? If you were to sort of really look at your business, what part of your business, if your business were a human being, what part of your business would technology, be? So would it be the head, hand, hearts, gut? And they all said that the phone that we have in our hands would be the backbone of our business.
Right.
Right. Now, so that is how advanced they are in understanding, the role of technology. But then one of them, who's the oldest rural woman entrepreneur, and, she comes from a minority community. She has faced extreme, violence and hardships in her life, has set up a business that is now actually exporting to multiple countries, right? She's a woman in Assam. And she tells me, look, the phone that I have in my hand, many people tell me that it has the same power and the same intelligence as that of a rocket. Is that right? So, so there was a hushed silence in the room. And we said, well, actually, the phone does have, the same intelligence of a rocket compressed in a small device. They said, if it has the intelligence of the rocket, then why has it not unleashed my life? Why am I and my business not up in the sky? Why are we still struggling on a daily basis? And in many ways, Michael, that would be my response to your question. So on the one hand, we are moving forth with technology. So it's technology for technology's sake. On the other hand, there is a lot of grassroots community intelligence that understands technology, that makes so much of the little technology that they have in hand. They put in a lot of money to buy phones, but the interfaces don't speak to them. So the world of technology is not creating or designing technologies for all, right? So if you sort of really look at the community of persons with disabilities, a large part of our networks of striking, exceptional change makers are people with disabilities. Now, in India, for people who have vision impairment, technology, which is the computer, becomes their eye. But they are not even seen as markets. They may be able to, they have the capacity, right, to buy, a small laptop. But how do you sort of really make assistive devices and solutions, which is technology, which is sort of really radically inclusive technology that will enable and sort of unleash the well-being, the productive powers, the sense of identity for everybody? That is not happening. So we could have people from the world of technology who go on to create miracles in, the global world of technology and become philanthropists. But unless technology starts to create and be reshaped for communities on the ground, technology is not really going to be the enabler that it has the potential to be. And where does this gap really lie? This gap really lies in the lack of intention.
But is it fair? Again, I'm handicapped by my lack of deep knowledge. But for example, I have read about a technology that has enabled fisher people in India while they are out at sea catching their fish to look at the places where they can get the best prices for their fish and bring their fish to that market as opposed to another that's going to be paying them a lot less. Similarly, at the governmental level, at least from what I read, there have been a number of very effective governmental interventions that have enabled people using their cell phones to access a number of government services and so forth. So I get deeply what you're saying about how, it hasn't penetrated to all kinds of areas, but at least in terms of global reputation, India's strategy of enabling technology is regarded as in advance of many other countries. And given that that's taking place in a context where globally India is really rising as a leading global power, with the decline of American hegemony, with the rise of the BRICS country and so on, India at a global level is seen as entrepreneurial, as smart about technology, as agile, as benefiting from this vast diaspora of Indian entrepreneurs, and not only tech entrepreneurs, but at least in American culture, the voice of Indian descent intellectuals, writers, creators of all kinds. So I feel like I'm speaking to you in a context of when I was in my 20s, India seemed like a sleeping giant. And now India it appears culturally, politically, technologically to be this extraordinary force. Of course, with all the issues that you're describing. But I'm just curious how you hold that external perception of what's happening.
No doubt. Right. No doubt we are rising, right? Otherwise, why there wouldn't have been a chance for, the woman to ask me this very, very powerful question. She says, we have a phone in our hand. It has the intelligence of a rocket, but it hasn't done anything to, sort of take me to the skies, right? I'm still struggling. So so it is, the narrative building on India that has happened is fair, and it is correct in large parts. But it is also the level of distribution and the level of penetration of the good forces of technology, the catalytic powers of technology, right? Now, technology is not a standalone in itself. In a country where access to where gender determines how much technology women can have in their hands, right? When the remoteness of your location determines the level of connectivity and infrastructure that you may have. So you can have a phone, but you do not have connectivity or even power. And then when you sort of really look at markets, do you know that the whole market of the fisher folks is the most unorganized in the country. It is so unorganized that you do have networks that were created really by civil society leaders, but it is a dynamic market, but it is not organized. And we know that there are a few social entrepreneurs who are doing what they are doing, right, to sort of really make access to markets for India's farmers, viable and meaningful. But at the scale at which we operate, and the levels of inequalities, in which communities work, I would really think that the penetration has barely gone beyond peri-urban areas, which could still be very large. And once again, Michael, what you say, and this is just the conversation that we are having, talks to the power of narrative building. Who is building the narrative? There's an African proverb that says that unless, the hunted build their own voice, history will always be written in the code of the hunters. So we continue to see disparities, but we also continue to see movement. And I think that is the beautiful paradox of our times, that movement and disparity sort of work hand in hand, and that continues to whet our appetite and our energies for moving forward. But really, with all the intelligence that this globally visible Indian tech world has, there really cannot be a justification for large numbers of young people who are living with disabilities in India to not be seen as a market. Where are the tech products for them? Mm-hmm. Where are the tech products really, for rural women entrepreneurs? Just coding and doing the code in multiple Indian languages. It's come to us only now, and we are seeing that a large part of the challenge of the solution. So sure, there are apps, and people can go to apps and access a scheme. But the multiple levels of documentation that is required at the back end for a person who, for a family of migrants that depends on labor, to even access that scheme is crippling. So, there are so many institutional factors, and there are so many systemic issues. So technology in its own self does not, sort of deliver a whole package of goods and transformation for people. And, the other flip side of technology also is that there is a lot of rooted human intelligence that lies with local communities that technology is taking us away from. Yes, we are not codifying the rooted intelligence, right? Mm. So while technology is a power and it is an enabler, but we have to work at 4 times the speed that all of us are in India to sort of really make sure that technology is actually put in the hands of those who are jobless. India has the highest rates of joblessness today. We are still one of the lowest We have the lowest rates of female of women's engagement in labor forces. So technology has to cut through the barriers of gender, identity, remote location, for it to truly be the enabling force and for it to truly live up to the global narrative that we have successfully built.
Now that's a profound set of points. And it's that power in you that enables me to understand the power of startup and the power of what you and your colleagues have done with the Omega Resilience Awards, because it's that ability to speak from that place in yourself and to recognize that, okay, even if India writ large has done some good things, it hasn't reached, the immense millions of people and the immense marginalized groups that, that haven't been reached. It's that sense that you won't rest as long as the marginalized are not treated fairly, as it reaches them. So very beautiful, and I'm grateful for that.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking these beautiful questions and creating such a safe space for the conversation, because these are not usually questions that one gets even asked.
Yes.
And so thank you. I feel very seen, and I'm very grateful for this conversation.
So I want to ask you about any final reflections, anything that we haven't touched on, anything that you'd like to say, either about your work broadly or about the Omega Resilience Awards. Is there anything we haven't touched on?
I really do want to say that when we started to work with Omega Resilience Awards, I had started to not be as hopeful as I used to be, 5 years back, 8 years back, simply because of how the walls of polycrisis were coming, sort of in on us, they were sort of falling in on us. The development sector in India is vibrant, but I was starting to feel the absence of audacity, courage, new ideas, at least in the ambit of work. And we are constantly working with social entrepreneurs and innovators. Not just for us at Aura, but for the Aura advisory group, for the network of nominators that Aura works with. Aura has, and thanks to Aura Fellows, Aura has helped us see that the way to engage with polycrisis, which is so dysfunctional and, it can lead to the dystopia, is really radical hope and optimism. And we hear that every day in the voice of our Aura Fellows, in how the unwillingness that you spoke of, they are taking that, the art of being unwilling to be quiet, to be frightened, to comply to a next level. And I think that is more than any other work really giving all of us a lot of new energy. And I sort of really do want to share this. We hear that from the Aura India advisors. They say this is the work that, is really giving us a lot of energy. And I think sort of really for us to focus on art and culture as norm change, as ways of building resilience, because art and culture is sort of really, culture is what defines and shapes, people's capacity to transform themselves and transform their families and transform, their communities. For the longest time, stories have been our biggest tools of change, So optimism and cultural shifts, shifting cultural norms, those are sort of really going to be the two narrative building, discourse shaping. I think all of us in startup are really going to start to work towards those, even though we do the bulk of the work that we do is strategy, but our strategies are really towards culture building for change. So I think
it's a beautiful decision to focus on art and culture. And I think precisely there's a connection between your sense that you're agnostic, but that you are somehow connected with the larger forces of the universe. And we were speaking earlier about Bill Drayton's, optimism that humanity, actually, even in the face of the polycrisis, is headed toward its next great adventure. And I think it is possible to hold that radical hope that even in the face of everything getting worse in so many ways, there is this extraordinary dynamism at the grassroots of people who won't accept that they have to do, that they have to take this without fighting back and without. So to me, art and culture have an especially intimate relationship with the imaginal world and with the sources of radical hope, with the powers of the universe, however we understand them, that we can turn to for nourishment and sustenance when things are hard.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to summarize.
Well, Manisha Gupta, we are so honored to be partnered with you in the Omega Resilience Awards. I'm so grateful for this conversation. I look forward to future opportunities to work more deeply together. Thank you for being with us at the New School.
Thank you, Michael, and the honor is really ours. Thank you. Thank you
Wonderful.
so much.
And back to Kira Epstein for a close. Kira?
Yes, thank you, Michael and Manisha. Manisha, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us and to be able to witness your hope and audacity. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation, Kyra. It's been amazing for me to, relive my my journey with you all.
And for those of you watching, thank you for listening and for joining us at the New School at Commonweal. We'll see you next time.
Don't take it, 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 don't